Okay, great. Let us start. Muted. No, next one. So hello everybody and welcome once again joining us for the Cape Town Power Platform user group. Boy, I almost messed that up. This is our second one and it's very exciting for me to host this one. And I've got a co-host today, Matthew, and he's going to take us through some great sessions on admin in a day. And I think that's very relevant for us in today's world where, we deploy applications and we need to look around also how do we governance that apps? How do we prevent people from just building out random apps and also keeping everything in a little containerized services? I almost wanted to say, just securing the environments, right? But I think before we continue, let me just go through this deck. Just let you guys know that we are recording the session. It will be made available afterwards. And also, please, if I can ask you guys just to mute yourselves, and then if you have a question or anything, unmute yourselves. It just keeps us from unnecessary background noises and also, interrupting the speakers also. If you have any questions, please feel free to either type it in the chat window or even, go and raise your hand or unmute yourself, ask the questions. We're open for questions and suggestions. And at the same time, we're also looking for speakers. So after the call today, we'll send out the link for a call for speakers. So if you want to present the next session or you find something cool you want to share, please let us know. The agenda for today, we've got what's new and what's happening in the news, and then I'm going to hand it over to Matthew, right? So a few things on what's new and what's happening in the news that I thought I'd share is that today, after this session at around 5 o'clock, we've got Microsoft Build happening. It's the biggest developer conference for developers that Microsoft hosts. It's also doing virtually in 3 different time zones at the same time. Great content that's on there as well, from Azure to Dynamics to Power Platform, right through to Office 365. So I would do encourage you guys to go have a look at it. One of the things I've picked out to show today is the developer virtual conference for 2020 that is going to be shown at the Build event. So please make sure to visit the link at the bottom, subscribe for it, and you attend today's virtual conference at Microsoft Build. Then another thing that I wanted to showcase today is the Microsoft Business Application Summit that happened earlier this month. All the sessions are now online. I would encourage everybody to go have a look at the sessions. There's quite a lot of content on there, some great sessions, and it's also a great learning experience. So, to see what is in the products and also what's coming out in the products. Now, one more thing before I hand it over to Matthew that I found was quite interesting, and also something to note is that Microsoft has recently released what we call a SQL connector onto the CDS, and I'll share these links afterwards as well. But essentially, what you can use the SQL Management Studio in order to connect into a CDS environment, right? One thing to note, though, you do have to be on a specific version of SQL in order for it to work. So you'll see that the version is 9.1.0.17437. That was a mouthful. And there is some settings that you have to do to enable it. So the CDS has got an org-db settings. You can either go through this Microsoft's org-db settings tool, run the tool, change the settings, and enable the setting in order for the SQL Management Studio to connect it. Or there's another different option that's a lot easier from a fellow called the Sean. And what he's done is he's pulled a solution out that you just install inside of the environment, and it gives you all your org-db settings. So once that's installed, you just go into the setting itself and you enable that DSL, and then you would be able to connect. Now, one thing I've noted, because I've tried this earlier on to connect into SQL, and it didn't work for me, right? So I got an error saying that that value isn't available and it can't be set. And I had a look and I figured out it was because of my version that's incorrect. Now, the thing that I wanted to show you guys that I found very interesting is that we've moved a lot of our notifications from Dynamics into the Microsoft 365 Admin Message Center. So if you go into the Admin Message Center, you'll see all of the updates relating to all the product sets that's available. But if you scroll down a little bit, you'll see that there's also Dynamics 365 and Power Platform changes coming. So here I saw, luckily my eye found this, a message stating that there's a service update that's coming, and it's going to be between 5 and 6 June. And it shows me what's the changes going to happen. So yeah, I can see that they're going to change my org up to version 9.1.0.180001. So I just have to wait a little bit. But the reason why I'm saying this is, it's very important for guys that want to know when is some changes applied in the org, and then also things like, when is Microsoft rolling out updates into organizations, and what changes is there. Now, the great thing about these admin centers, you can have them email you. You can also set up specific people to get notified when these changes come in. Right? I think also, lastly, there's been a flow connector that connects into these admin center messages. So, you can also work around that. Right? So that's all from my side for now. But thank you guys so much for tuning in. And, I'm going to hand it over to Matthew now. Just maybe let me do this last slide. Hey. And hand that over to Matthew. And please, Matthew, go ahead.
Thanks, Mornay. I must just say your graphics on your deck are beautiful. I love them. So you must share those with me at some point. Yeah, thanks. Yeah, some interesting stuff coming. That SQL thing connector is pretty cool. And the message center, you mentioned flow connector. You could create a flow that sends a something to Teams, and then you can add it to a channel in a team and have your admins be aware of those message center notifications right away in the Teams client. I've seen people doing that. And also people have connected it to Planner within Teams. So you can have like a planner laying out all the changes that are coming, so you know about them and when they're going to make a change, etc., etc. So that's also an awesome way to integrate that information. Anyway, thanks. I'm going to put my camera off now that you've all seen me and where I am, and that it's pretty warm in here. But thanks for the intro. So I am Matthew Levy. I am a solutions architect at MB Consult. I'm also an enterprise mobility MVP. And so my focus has always been on security and governance and administration of systems. And so I've come from a long history of admin, sysadmin, administering Exchange systems, Active Directory, then some data leakage prevention systems on premises, in the cloud, etc. So my interest in anything data related is how do we secure the data and how do we manage the data and govern it so that our users can use it and they are free to use the data that is available to them, but the data is only the data that they are meant to have available to them, and that it doesn't get out of the business to other organizations that could result in a breach of some kind or a loss of intellectual property, for example. So anyway, let me that's an intro of myself. I'm going to get my PowerPoint presentation up. Right. So what I'm going to talk about is admin in a day, which is actually a day-long workshop, but I've split it up into 4 sessions. This being the first of those sessions, and so this session will focus on the security. So the whole admin in a day set or workshop entails some hands-on labs. However, I just have to say this up front, that the lab that I had tried to prepare for today failed because Microsoft have made a change to the environment limits in the Power Platform. So to set up this hands-on lab, you need 10 gigs of environment capacity, and all the tenants that I have, even a trial tenant that I spun up, have a limit of 1 gig. And so anything over and above 1 gig, I couldn't provision. So I'm sorry, and I'm apologizing up front that I don't have the hands-on labs, but hopefully by next time, the next session, we'll have the hands-on labs available for people to play with. So I'm just going to speak tonight on the security part of things and understanding our environment. And so it'll just be a quick presentation, and then I open it up to questions. And I'm just going to say this up front. I'm no expert in Power Platform, PowerApps, Power Automate. I've played with a couple of them. But as I said in the beginning, I'm an administrator at heart, and I focus on security and governance. So I always like to understand how these things work in the back end and how they can be managed and sort of governed from a central IT perspective. So I took on the challenge of presenting this series so that I could learn from it. And so I'm basically going to share what I've learned. And so forgive me if you know of a lot more than I do, and I'm sure there are some of you out there that do know a lot more than I do. So please, feel free to chime in and correct me where I'm wrong, or if you hear that I'm actually, talking down a road that I don't know too much about, help me out. Let me know what we're talking about, and we can have it as a discussion. It's not meant to be necessarily a full-on lecture from me. So just to highlight the series, module 1, which is what tonight is just understanding the basics of security and administration. Then in the other sessions, we'll look at the monitoring, alerting and actions that we can create, and then deploying applications within PowerApps and Power Automate. And so we speak about the application lifecycle management. So module 1, which is today, is secure. And this is the hands-on labs, which is available. It's publicly available, so you can have a look at it, but just be aware that there is that capacity restriction. So the objective of the hands-on lab is so that you can understand by exploring and seeing what a tenant that has been pre-configured with a whole lot of environments and applications looks like, and policies that can be put in place, and how you can manage the data. So the call to action after this is to go ahead and have a look at that admin center, as well as the Center of Excellence starter kit. So the Center of Excellence is essentially an idea of having not only tools, but people that are involved in your organization in managing the Power Platform, as well as deploying apps and being the champions within your organization for the Power Platform. So have a look at the Center of Excellence resources, and here are some other resources that are available to you. That's presentation number 1.
So guys, I think that it would be great if you guys can also unmute, maybe say some of the challenges that you guys are facing at the moment. Like Matthew is saying, the COE starter kit is a great example of where to start. I know that a lot of our customers, one of the biggest, things that we get is they say that when we deploy PowerApps, how do we, in actual fact, make sure that not everybody goes and creates their own little app, and then at the end of the day, we sit with 1,000 apps, and it's difficult to manage and contain those apps. So please, I think that if there is any questions, or feel free just to go ahead and ask.
Mornay, I just want to check from a time perspective, what time are we due to end?
It's build starts at 5, so I was thinking that maybe we can end latest 4:30. It gives people a little bit of time to stretch the legs and get ready for build. Okay,
cool. So then let me crack on. Okay, so the admin overview, as I mentioned, there's govern, which is the 4 sessions: secure, monitor, alert, action, and deploy. And then there's 3 extras that are part of your growing your environment, your Power Platform. But we'll get into that in a minute. So I'm sure there's no need for an introduction to the Power Platform, but essentially it's a one low-code platform that spans Office 365, Dynamics 365, and flows or Power Automate, as well as the Power Virtual Agents. So I've dabbled with Power Automate when it was called Flow, and obviously everybody I was surprised at the name change and thought it was a strange thing to do, because they'd integrated Flow into the name Flow into so many things. But I guess Power Automate makes more sense as a name. So why are we here today? And perhaps this will explain that Satya has talked about the Power Platform being a core part of Microsoft's strategy and Microsoft's mission to empower everyone on the planet to do more. So the Power Platform is, the core mission is to empower every person, every developer to do more. And so that means that everybody is a developer. Because of the low code, no code objective, everybody is building something. So I would like to understand what the audience is like if we're talking about developers, just organizational people from business, administrators, so maybe put in the chat whether you're an administrator, if you're a developer, if you're a business unit or business user that is using Power Apps or interested in Power Apps and Power Automate to create solutions in the organization. And so even outside of Microsoft, analysts like Gartner and Forrester have recognized that Power Apps is in the leadership quadrant for low-code application platform, LCAP market. So this is quite a commendable feat that Microsoft have achieved in such a short period of time. But it's testimony to Microsoft's vision and execution. So over the past 3 years, the adoption has grown. So we've seen, and probably more than 700% in production apps in the last year. So that's not your dev apps, your demo apps, or your test apps. Those are apps that are used regularly by large number of people in organizations. So the first 2 years has seen an amazing growth, but it was based on people that are the power champions or power addicts. And they are people like probably most of the people on this forum, myself included, that are eager to see how things work and get started with stuff and build things, see a problem, try and solve it with solutions that are there, or technology that is available to us through the Office 365, through the Power App and Power Platform SKUs that are available to us. But then something has changed, and these power addicts are now sort of influencing other people, and those other people are looking to make changes throughout the organization. So they're implementing solutions across multiple teams. There's large enterprises that are using, like I said, the center of excellence. So they have a team of the center of excellence guys that are advocating Power Platform as a platform for solving solutions, or solving problems. And then, of course, there's the requirements and regulatory legal requirements to have things contained within certain environments, or comply to certain regulations and constrictions. And there's no easier way to do that than to use something that is already compliant by nature. But then we have some of the questions that we have from organizations and administrators. And so these are things like, how do we secure the data? How do we secure that data is flowing between one thing and another correctly, and it's not going to the wrong place or the wrong connector? And making sure that we stick within those governance frameworks, those compliance regulations, and that we're not losing, there's not a risk of information being leaked. So that's an information risk management. So this is just an explanation, or just a definition of governance. We have a couple of definitions of governance. So there's information technology governance, which is obviously a subset of corporate governance. And within those, we've got a couple of other sub-governance functions. But essentially, we're governing the way that IT operates and the way that solutions are used to benefit the organization. But there's things like keeping costs down, but also ensuring that risk is kept at a minimum as well. So the Power Platform's philosophy, or Microsoft's philosophy, is to empower anyone to be a maker. So that means that, like we said in the beginning, anybody can use this open system for building. And the idea is that you don't need to escalate your privileges or your rights to be able to build something. What you have access to, you can utilize and build something. But at the same time, you want the administrators of the system to be able to see the lay of the land, what environments are out there, and what's being used to do what, so that the strategy can be defined in terms of how data is governed, applications are used, and the environments, how things are used within environments. So our governance session is, like I said, the 4 pillars: secure, monitor, alert and action, deploy. And so today we'll be looking at security, but in addition to that, there's also the growth part of grow and govern. So nurture with technical training, and making sure that the infrastructure allows for the organic growth, and then obviously having support for those environments and systems. I am not able to see the chat, Monet, so I don't know if there are any questions at this stage.
Not at this moment. We are just sharing resources, and it seems like there's quite a few devs and even ISV people on the call, so that's great.
Cool. Partners, awesome. Okay, so I'll carry on. So with security, we primarily want to understand what we have so that we can secure it. So and we also need to know what options are available to us in order to secure it. So we'll look at where we're getting data from, or where things are being created. How are we, what's the origin of our apps and flows, and then looking at the environments themselves. Sorry, I just had to clear my throat. So who's building solutions? We see a couple of trends. We see organizations that allow their users, as they call them, citizens, to go out and just develop and create things. And because of the low barrier to entry, it's easy enough to apps are being spun up organically within the organization because users have access to the functionality and the data so that they can create things. But we also see, on the other hand, that some organizations are very central IT focused, and they want everything to be controlled and managed from within a central IT department, and they grow into a centralized IT center of excellence, for example. But some of the organic organizations also move into they see a lot of sprawl and a lot of uptake, but they need to actually control what goes on and govern them a little bit more. So they move more towards a centralized IT model. And so where do apps and flows come from? Initially, people, they want to automate stuff. There is the option to automate things within Office 365. And individuals can spin up their own environment so that they can test out Power Automate and PowerApps using the community plan. I'm not 100% on the licensing and the availability of community plans, but I'm sure other people on this call can explain the licensing. And then paid licenses that are available within Microsoft 365, Office 365 gives users the ability to build apps and flows. Now, there is something called the self-service ticketing or self-service purchase, which users can, like in the previous slide, they can go and enable a SKU of some sort that is known as a self-service purchase. But administrators may want to switch ability, and there is a PowerShell command or a script to do that. So you can set the allow self-service purchase for specific fault. I don't know how relevant this is, but I'm pretty sure there are some admins out there that would want to switch this off, or probably don't even know that it's on by default. So then how do we know about our environments? And we've got some portals, and obviously there's portals for administrators and there's portals for makers or your users. And so at the top, we've got the admin portals to assign licenses, and that's done through the normal admin.microsoft.com and partner.microsoft.com if you are a CSP. And the Power Platform Admin Center, which can be reached by going to aka.ams/ppac, is the Power Platform Admin Center. The changes that have been made recently mean that those sub-platform admin portals have been deprecated and have collapsed into the one Power Platform Admin Center. So Dynamics 365 365, PowerApps, and Power Automate, for example, all roll into the Power Platform Admin Center. Power BI, on the other hand, as far as I know, and other guys on the call can correct me if I'm wrong, still has its own admin center. And if you are a maker and creating apps, then you go to make.powerapps, and building Power Automate flows, you go to flow.microsoft.com. See, the name is still it still exists in the URL. Then you need some admin permissions in order to manage your environments. So global admin automatically has admin to the tenant, and there's a new role called Power Platform Admin role. It's no longer coming soon. It is there. So you can assign that role to specific users so that they can administer environments and objects within the policies within the Power Platform. And then for those ISVs and partners, there's delegated admin, where you can have either full administration to the service or the services in a tenant through the partner center, which I don't particularly like, because it means that anybody that is a an agent or an administrator in your partner center has admin rights to all of your customers, and you can't say what specific users have access to. So there are other ways of delegating admin rights through Azure RBAC roles, but we won't get into that today. So then we have our environments, and this is where we want to, this is what we want to look at and see our environments within the platform. So environments, just to understand where they live or text of them, they live within an Azure tenant. So your authentication is done through Azure Active Directory. So you can have multiple environments per AD tenant, Azure AD tenant, so within your organization. And environments are essentially the scope or for the life cycle and the permissions of applications and environments. So environments from a data residency concern are tied to a geographic location. So every tenant has a default environment, and that's created automatically, and then you can create it for production, etc. Full control over who can create those environments. So you can manage who can create environments and who can't. And that is done through the admin center, where you manage the creation of environments. It's also a good idea, it's been noted, and this is what I've learned, that the default environment that gets created by the first it's called normally the organization name and with defaults in the brackets, and it's recommended to rename that environment to personal productivity, for example, and that's where all your users create all their personal productivity applications and flows. You can't delete the default environment, but you can manage what happens within that environment. These are the types of environments that we have. So a developer environment is created, for example, when a user signs up for the PowerApps community plan. You can't restrict it unless it's done through a service ticket. So you can log a ticket with Microsoft to restrict it, but by default, you can't restrict it. Production environments can be created by any licensed user as long as there is a gig of remaining storage capacity or more. So there are in this session, I'm going to speak to two best practices. This is best practice number one, and that is establishing an environment strategy. So create a an environment strategy where you have environments for your dev, your UAT, production, and anything that is going to be a trial or a sandbox for people to play around with. So as I mentioned, the default environment is created automatically. New signers that, new users that sign up for PowerApps are automatically made a maker in that environment, and they're not automatically added to the environment admin role. So you have to manage your admins through the RBAC functionality. So there's no limitation to the number of apps or flows that can be deployed within an environment. And you have gateways which leverage common services that span Power Platform. So that includes Power BI. So the gateways are enabled by default, and they're only enabled in the default environment. So if you want to move the gateway or gateways to another environment, there is a process through a support ticket to migrate the gateway to a non-default environment. Although there is talk of a self-service way to support gateways in a non-default environment, but I don't know if that's available yet. Then the default environment can also now have a CDS database, a common data source database. So that allows for you to create entities that the business can utilize across all of the platforms. So that I don't want to go too much into CDS because I don't know a lot about it, but the common data source is as far as I understand, a way of classifying and creating entities that pertain to your organization that can be used across the platform. This is just an example environment strategy where you've got production, application lifecycle management environments, default, and maker environments. Okay, and then we've got the 5 layers of security. So like I said, we've got the tenant, which is governed by Azure Active Directory. And so on top of that, you've got something called Azure AD conditional access. From my enterprise mobility experience, I deal with conditional access a lot. And so that's essentially a granting or blocking access to something based on conditions. Then you've got your environment roles that you can define. Then you've got resource permissions for apps and flows. So essentially whatever the flows and the apps are connecting to, referred to as resources, you have permissions on those resources. And then within the common data source, you have further granularity in terms of security roles. So if the environment has a CDS attached, you define the roles within the CDS security roles. And then there's something called cross-tenant restrictions. So you can restrict between Office 365 tenants connectivity from users in one organization to users in another organization. Or data within another organization using a user Office 365 Outlook. A user might be restricted from accessing Outlook for another organization's tenant, even though they have credentials. Okay, and then the most important thing is securing the data at rest. So PowerApps and Flow does not provide users with access to any data that they don't already have access to. So I think I mentioned this in the beginning, but only data that is available to users is available for them to use in PowerApps and Power Automate. So it's important to structure your data so that your permissions are set out at the data level and that data at rest is secured. So this is just conditional access. I will in depth, but as I mentioned, you can grant or block access based on a number of conditions. It does require Azure AD Premium P1 or P2, so it is a licensed feature. And then numbers 2 to 4 is your environment security and access control. So if there's no CDS, it's controlled on the environment roles. If there is a database, then security within the CDS takes over and controls access to the data within those entities.
Sorry, Matthew.
Yep.
There seems to be a little bit of audio breakup. I don't know if
I'm
internet
terribly
is
sorry. Possibly. I'm very sorry about that. I will see what I can do. Just.
It's fine. I mean, we hear you like 98% of the time.
98%. Okay. Okay. Do we have any other questions or anything to raise in the chat?
Not at the moment, I believe. I think maybe, can we showcase some of these things?
Yeah. So
if I can maybe just talk around some of this, the slide is currently up. From a Dynamics perspective, or even a Power Platform perspective, Power Apps perspective, one of the great things is that security roles, you can build very strict, what we call Chinese walls, where you can prevent people from viewing certain records, but you can share it in between. And if you look at things like securing data down to a field level, right? So one of the things is that if I store somebody's personal information, like the ID numbers or account number or whatever, I can then secure it on that field level that, that data can't be viewed unless you've got the specific rights to it. But what's interesting also is that security is one aspect of it, right? But another aspect of it is that where I can build out Power Apps, and if I just don't even reference those secure fields, then the end user won't even see it. So that it comes down to you can build this security hierarchy and matrix, or you can build an app where you just don't reference those fields at all. Then the end user won't see it, and then it comes to a little bit of a debate. But one thing to note about the security roles, and I've seen another MVP present this, and it works quite well, is the security roles, especially it stacks. So what you want to do is you want to create a base security role that everybody can, or you give a security role name, and then specific people can read those entities, and then when they need to write to it, then you create a secondary security role, and you give that specific permissions they need on that secondary security role. That way, when I add somebody into organization, they inherit a base security role where they can, for instance, read all the records they have got access to in their business unit. But once they need to perform actions, then I start assigning additional, security roles that will fill in those gaps. So think of it in a sense where you've got like, a red, green, blue security role, where green is everybody, blue is everybody, plus somebody that needs to write to accounts or contacts, and maybe one level up is everybody that needs to be able to create cases. So I give access in that hierarchy format. So that's maybe some consideration also when going into building out the security and security roles. That's all from my side. Sorry, please go ahead.
No, that's very interesting. I mean, that's very cool. What the other MVP is demonstrated, and I suppose that speaks to most sort of ACLs or permission models, where you know everyone has a base level, and then you get more restrictive as you go, more sensitive data kind of thing, and then I would imagine that a block access overrules anything else. So, you know, where rules overlap or permission groups overlap or roles overlap, there's, you know, least restrictive or most permissive, depending on what we're dealing with, but a block will overwrite everything.
Yeah, also something that, you know, we've seen happen quite a bit is when, you know, people need to make changes in the system. So they need to make customization changes, or they even want to promote a solution to production. Now, a lot of these environments also lock down that you have to, for instance, log a change request. The change request gets promoted based on the risk and all those type of things. And then what will happen is you'll get access for that deployment period. And that will essentially give you these roles, right? So that's one of the things. Another security option that I see works quite well is you can in actual fact create 80 groups, and then you assign a security group or security role into that 80 group. So it means that, you know, everybody gets added into the 80 group, and they automatically inherit that security role from a Power Platform perspective. Or PowerApps. When I talk about Power Platform, it's PowerApps / Dynamics perspective. So that works quite well. You know, I think also if you look at the whole cycle where people do onboarding, so you start at an organization, then you created an AD. You know, you can automate that process. You know, so there's some organizations that talk about term access, right? Even though it's a term for different technology, but the idea is that you're in an organization, and then you get assigned a role based on what you do in AD, and then when you're done, you know, they just remove you out of that group or the AD group, and you lose your rights again. So it's quite interesting, you know, to see where we're going with this and how far it's actually been developed, because on the on-premise world, you literally just had, you know, a security role, and that's about it, right? So, and also the roles and things were a little bit more open in a sense of what you can and can't do. I think one thing that I want to mention lastly with this is that from an online perspective, right, there's a big integration into things like the Security and Compliance Center. So when we look at things like GDPR compliance and also, you know, even data leaks and risks and those type of things, right? Every action that you perform inside of the platform get written into the Security and Compliance Center. And it's as easy as going into audit and then just enabling that. And the great thing about that, it forms part of a bigger picture. So if I go into the Security and Compliance Center, and then I can see, for instance, who sent me mails, what actions was performed in Dynamics, as well as, you know, who accessed specific records for things like data leakage and building up those type of reports, right? So that's one great thing. And I think that the last thing that we see quite a lot is, I mean, especially you that comes from the Intune world, is that, you know, the physical application on the mobile device itself, I can secure. So what I mean by that is a lot of people will walk around with a mobile device with either a Power App on it or Dynamics app or whatever, and that still holds access to data, right? So that still holds valuable information. I can connect to a CDS environment if the phone is unlocked or whatever the case might be. But in Intune, I can actually lock that down so that, you know, even if somebody steals my phone or get access to my phone, then they won't physically be able to open the app per se. You know, so those are the other security aspects that I think is also valuable to mention.
Absolutely, yeah. So it's a layered approach, I guess.
Yeah, no, definitely.
Okay, cool. I'm gonna skip to the next section, which is data loss prevention. So we also have a lot of, or I have a question about data loss prevention, and I'm sure a lot of other people are concerned about data leakage or data loss. So if we talk about PowerApps and Power Automate or flows, we speak primarily about connectors. And so data can go from one connector to another within an app. And so how DLP works within the Power Platform is you classify the connectors. So you classify certain connectors as business data only or business connectors, and then other connectors are classified as non-business, and usually new connectors that come on board, and the Power Platform is adding connectors all the time, but any new connector goes into the non-business classification by default, and you can change that, and I'll show you now how you can do that. And then you can explicitly block certain connectors. So I'm actually gonna just break out of PowerPoint and show you the connectors. Okay, so Mona, just let me know that you can see my screen.
Yep, there we go.
Cool. So I'm going to sign into my Power Platform Admin Center. And as I mentioned earlier, these are your environments. You can see what environments I have. But on the left-hand side of the admin.powerplatform.microsoft.com, there's the data policies blade. And so here you can see I've got a couple of DLP policies or data policies. And if I just look at the Contoso Global DLP policy, that's just the name. And here I have the connectors defined for me. So by default, it goes to the non-business connectors, and it's listed as the default. So I mentioned you can change the default. So if a new connector is onboarded, you can specify where it goes by clicking on the set default group. Now that applies, if I understand correctly, to this policy only, not to all your policies. So you have to do this classification default per policy. So I can say that any new application that comes on board goes into the blocked classification, although that's probably not a good idea. But a non-business classification is probably the best of both worlds. Users can use it, but if you've got business connectors with sensitive data, applications can't communicate across the two. So just to explain how DLP works is if you have connectors in the business classification and connectors in the non-business classification, one connector from one classification can't share data with a connector in another classification. So for example, in this classification, I've got the common data service and I've got SharePoint as a business connector, which means that any data in there is corporate data, that's sensitive data. So it can't interact with any of these connectors. So if I have a flow, for example, that takes something from SharePoint and sends it out via, I don't know, any of these connectors,
So
then
Matthew,
it won't. Yeah.
I can give you one example is that, a lot of organizations don't necessarily want to have data sent out via Twitter, or Facebook. So what will happen is they will block those connectors. So you can't send things out in that case.
Yeah. So that's exactly right. So, as a base policy that applies to all the environments, and that's the other part of the DLP policies is the scope, and I'll get to that in a second. But have a base policy that then blocks certain connectors so that data just can't go out through those connectors. So you can't even build an application with those connectors. I'm not sure if the connectors are unavailable to people in sort of templates and things. I would imagine that templates might have the connectors still listed, but an access denied or something would notify people trying to create a flow or an app that they can't use that connector. So here I'm going to move the Twitter connector to the blocked. What did it do now? Yeah, it should have moved it to the block.
You moved it to business.
Did I?
Yeah.
Oh, I did. Look at that. Move to non-business. Sorry, yeah. Thanks. So I clicked the wrong button, block. So that'll move it to the block. And so I mentioned scope. So this is a global DLP policy that applies to all my environments, but it excludes certain environments. So you can see that I've excluded the personal productivity environment. So next, update policy. If I go back to the list of DLP policies, you can see that Thrive, which is an HR application, there's a DLP policy for that applies to all my environments. Then I've got a sandbox DLP, which is probably less restrictive, but it only applies to the trying CDS environment. And then I've got the global, which is all environments except for one. And the one is that personal productivity environment. So there's scopes and there's the connectors. So the DLP policies are essentially controlling which connectors can converse with one another and which ones can't, and which connectors are allowed and which aren't blocked outright. If I go back to my environments just quickly, just to show you, these are the two environments. I renamed the default environment personal productivity, and here you can see who the environment admins are and who all the makers are within that environment. So anybody, this means that it's part of the tenant, so it's org-wide. So anybody within the organization is a maker, like the slide said. I'm just having a look at my PowerPoint deck. There's not too many more slides. It's more on the DLP policies. But essentially, the second best practice is to set up DLP policies. So first of all, block any unsupported non-Microsoft connectors like Dropbox or Facebook, any of the social medias. And then restrict business data connectors that contain sensitive organization, categorize them as business only so that they can't interact with the unclassified or the non-business connectors. And then thirdly, as part of best practice number 2, create exceptions for policies for your different environments. So have an environment scope with exceptions for environments that could potentially have a Twitter account or something. The DLP management through the UI is what I just showed you, and it's pretty, I would say, simple and rudimentary, but it gets the job done. There is more granularity in the PowerShell module, so you can manage the DLP policies through PowerShell. I'm not 100% certain if it ties into the security and compliance PowerShell module where you can define DLP policies within that. Maybe somebody, Monet or Ewan, could comment on that, but I would imagine going forwards, there would be a security and compliance DLP portion to this DLP management feature. And
Matthew, it's Ewan.
Hi, Ewan.
The idea is that obviously lots of things will end up in security and compliance center, and I don't have anything explicit to share right now with regards to where those things will end up. But as it stands today, the DLP policies will still live within the admin center of Power Platform, and some new changes and stuff will come through there before we'll see any major changes or any major shifts from a platform perspective. The one thing that I just wanted to just quickly add as well is just if you look at DLP, and you spoke about security and DLP, it's almost like an inverted triangle. So if you think of your default environment that you label as your personal productivity, just note from a DLP perspective, that would be the most restrictive. Because it's open and available to kind of all users. And as you kind of like think of a triangle and narrows out, so as you kind of open up environments and you make environments for specific user groups or specific groups of users. So from a user perspective, it becomes kind of more restrictive, but from a DLP perspective, it becomes less restrictive.
Less restrictive.
That's kind of the kind of approach that one would take to it. And your default environment, you'll probably want to have no gateway, no custom connectors, only the base licenses, so there's no access to premium connectors there. And it's probably the most highly restricted policy, only allowing base access to some stuff. And then by exception, as you build out other environments and you load less restricted policies there, you'll then exclude those environments from the default.
That's a great tip, Ewan. Thanks for that. Like that makes sense to me, that as a default, you have the most restriction in terms of DLP, because everybody's going to go in there. But as you get more explicit environments, more specific environments that are tailored towards certain people higher up in the business or performing different functions, then you have a less restrictive policy in terms of DLP, but you've limited the access to those environments to a small group.
Yeah. And with very specific roles as well, especially if you've got CDS, then you can have very specific roles as well.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. Thanks. Yeah, so that's me. That's my presentation. Just a review, so understand what you have and put controls in place and establish some governance across your organization. And one other thing is just, if you're creating DLP policies, communicate those with your unit users, because if you create DLP policies and users aren't aware, they're gonna run into issues, things not working. Also, if you have applications and Power Automate flows that exist already and you start implementing DLP policies, you can affect the functionality of those flows and apps. So things could break.
Matthew, one thing to add, that if you do install that COE kit that you mentioned earlier, it has got a couple of apps, especially around DLP. So it allows you to actually build out the DLP policy and see what the net effect of that policy would be on your current environment, given the flows that you have in the apps. So you can kind of see what will happen before you actually implement it and break anything. That's pretty useful.
Awesome. Yeah. Very cool.
I'm just checking, where is the COE URL?
I'll put it on the IM window if you guys want.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you, Matthew. I just want to share two more things I think can be valuable here as well. Let me just get this presenter mode. Okay, so I found this site, and it seems there's quite a lot of information on here. There's also LM guidance and those type of things. But one thing I wanted to show on here is in the admin center. So if I go to admin.powerplatform.microsoft.com or admin.powerplatform.com, then what will happen is that, underneath the analytics tab, I can in actual fact see some of the things that's going on inside of my organization. Now, previously, this was a little bit more difficult because you had to install a solution and you could only view this within an environment itself. But now they've taken it out of that very specific solutionized way, and they've made it general. So now, if I can view the analytics side, I can see in actual fact what goes on inside of the system. Everything from how many people are on it, how many plugins are executed, also things like how people are accessing the system. And this is quite interesting because what happened lately is that we've been helping customers roll out things like the COVID crisis communication apps, and a lot of them are asking us, but how can we actually see if people are using the app, right? So one of the mechanisms of doing this is in actual fact seeing through these type of dashboards what's going on, from the Power Platform perspective, if you're using the CDS, and another way of and just also seeing if you are inside of your, how can I say, your capacity rounds, like things like, am I running out of this space? Is there maybe a plugin that's running that's causing a lot of records to be created, or long-running processes, or whatever the case might be? But at the same time is I can view things like how many daily runs of my flows were there, and those type of informations. And I think this is very critical for organizations that need to have insights in it. And if you want to take this even further, one of the things that you can do is install the things like the COE starter kit. And the COE starter kit has got a bunch of reports that will give you more and more insights into especially what's happening inside of your organization, right? So definitely, once again, the COE kit, I would say, is a brilliant starting point. And then also there was a question around where can we get access to the labs that Matthew showed us. So there is a GitHub site, but we will share all the resources after the call. And you can go and download the labs itself and then work on the labs and materials and maybe deploy it inside of your own organization and let us know how it goes. But yeah, I think that for me is kind of the things I wanted to touch on. If you want to find out how to enable that security compliance center within the organization integration into the Power Platform, you go under settings, and then under administration, you just go system settings, and under audit, you'll be able to enable it. So if I say start audit greetings, it will say that it actually goes and pushes it down to the security compliance center. Now, I think one thing to note is that security compliance center is a product set of Office 365, and it governs the bigger picture of things, right? So everything that essentially happens on the whole platform stack can feed into there, from what's happening in documents, sharing, all those type of things. But what's great about it is this is another, I want to say, data entry point or data flow point into the bigger picture, right? So that is something also to note. And with that, I think that's all from my side. Anything else from maybe Ewan or Matthew or the audience? Anybody? No?
I'm okay.
Quiet.
Yeah, everybody's going to sleep. I'm sorry. I shared the lab admin in a day pack, the URL. There's actually quite a number of resources on the GitHub repo. It's not just admin in a day. There's a number of resources. So check out that repo for all sorts of Power Platform resources. Morné, it's getting a bit cloudy where you are. I think it's going to rain soon.
Yeah, no, it is.
I think while you guys are talking, I'll just show I'll show the COE dashboard when you load the COE dashboard, this is what Monet was saying. This is the additional views you get around your environments and stuff. That's quite nice. Kind of dives into your environments for you.
That's
yeah.
the Power BI dashboard that
it's a Power BI dashboard once you got the COE toolkit installed.
It's beautiful, stunning.
Yeah, it's quite nice. You can filter down to different types of apps. You can see what the makers are doing, who's making apps, how many apps they've made, how many flows, etc., how it's being used, and then the connections that it's being used as well. It's pretty useful as well.
So one of the solutions I've seen, and I think this essentially forms part of it, is people want to build out apps, or they've got ideas for apps, right? So the whole idea around PowerApps is that you've got this low code, no code, and people want to build out these little apps. So they've got either like a suggestion box where they can put in apps like, how can I get more leave days, or how can I get community days, or, implement specific policies, or whatever the case might be, parking apps, or whatever the case, visitor registration apps. And those apps goes into a centralized place, and then somebody looks at it and says, yo, let's invest in this, right? But what happens is that you can't have everybody just go and build out apps. So what I've seen is that people use these type of admin in a day sites, the COE starter kits, to build a platform where you can go and request where you can go and request the environment, and you can go and request the purpose of the environment, and then that gets assigned to you, and you can have your own little playground. And the great thing about it is that it's not done in isolation, so people know about it. So I think that I've seen solutions like that, and it works really, really great. So yeah. But that said, it is built in 15 minutes. So I just want to say thank you very, very much, Matthew, and Ewan, and everybody on the call for joining us once again. It's going to be awesome. I can't wait for the next one, and we'll definitely, see you guys again. And if there's anything you'd like us to cover as a topic, please feel free to reach out. And also, if you want to present, we've also got the call for speakers link that I've shared, and I'll share it again in a mail that will go out with all the resources that we spoke about today. But have a wonderful evening, everybody, and see you next time.
Thanks, Monet. Thanks for hosting. Bye-bye. Thanks, Ewan. Bye-bye, everyone.